Hey, how you doing? Tori is here. So from the title you can already assume what this video is about, but you can trust me when I say it is worth a watch since I have made a huge mistake with one of my components. But we all learn from our mistake, so why don't you just sit back and maybe learn some from mine. One important thing before we start, don't forget to ground yourself, you know, static electricity. You don't want to fry any of your components, do you? Easiest way to do it is to touch a big metal surface such as a radiator. Here you can see the first component I remove is the GPU, which is held by two screws. I remove the 8-pin connector and then by undoing the latch I can lift it out from the motherboard. Next two things are the RAMs. Undoing the latch again and then just taking it out. Now it's time to disconnect every cables such as the data cables, the 24-pin motherboard cable, USBs and LEDs and also the case fans. Oh, and obviously the CPU 8-pin cable as well. In my case, pun intended, there are 8 screws that holds the motherboard. Only 8 and not 9 because the one in the middle is actually a standoff, which helps me big time when I'm installing the motherboard in the case. So by removing the 8 screws we can lift the motherboard out carefully. We also need to make sure that we place it on a non-conductive surface. Here I'm just removing my NVMe SSD and then just placing it on the side. And now it's time to remove the CPU cooler. My cooler has got these plastic quick lock mechanisms, which I will show you in a second. The most important thing is to try and go crosswise so you remove the tension evenly, even if your CPU is dead. Or is it? Cleaning off the thermopaste from the CPU cooler is necessary since we are going to apply some new thermopaste and that will decrease the temperatures. I use some Q-tips here and giving myself time to make a clean job. Now it's time to assemble the new motherboard. I'm just going through the box and taking out all the stuff that is needed for the build, such as the motherboard itself, data cables, the I/O shield, the M.2 standoffs and screws, and most importantly, the stickers. After I carefully remove the motherboard from the plastic bag, I will place it on the motherboard box. The box is a really good surface since it's non-conductive and it is also a bit flexible, so it makes the assembly more safe. After a quick unboxing of the new CPU, I was honestly surprised how similar the processor look like. You can see when I hold them side by side, if you don't really pay attention to the writing or the side of the PCB, you could easily mix them up. Take extra caution when you install the CPU since this is the most sensitive component. If you bend one of the pins on the motherboard, you can basically chuck it out. On the CPU you can find a small triangle in one of the corners. We have to line that up with the same triangle or a dot on the motherboard. Lowering down the CPU, we need no force at all, just place it in, give it a little wiggle to make sure it's in place, then we can lower the hatch down, securing it with a lever. You feel a little bit of resistance, but don't worry, that's how it should be. Also, the CPU cover will pop off and with that we have successfully installed the brain of the computer. Always make sure that you don't apply too much or too little thermopaste. For this CPU, I would say just a little bit bigger than the size of a rice is enough. And then we can install our CPU cooler. Now, most likely your CPU cooler looks different since this one of mine is just a no-name cooler. What matters again is the crosswise installing. So try to install from one corner, then go to the opposite corner and so on. All that so you even the tension out. Oh, and also try not to lift the cooler up and down. You don't want to cause bubbles between the cooler and the CPU. Now I show you the quick lock mechanisms that I was talking about earlier. It is easy to install them and it saves a lot of time. Also, I am lucky enough that it is actually compatible with this motherboard as well. Here I am reinstalling the NVMe SSD using the standoff screws so the SSD doesn't bend. and then lining up the RAMs and installing them. Now it's time to prepare the case. For me, most of the stuff is already installed, but I still have to swap some of the components, such as the IO shield. Just pop the old one out and put the new one in. And then I try to make some space by moving the cables so I can carefully lower the motherboard down into the case, making sure that I don't move it around too much because there are sensitive parts on the back of the motherboard as well. As I mentioned before, I got 8 screws to secure the motherboard to its place, and then after that I plug every cable back in, trying to keep it as clean and cable managed as possible. This motherboard also needs an additional 4-pin CPU power cable for overclocking, which I install here. And last but not least, installing the GPU, securing it with the screws and plugging the 8-pin connector. So everything seems fine, PC upgraded and is ready to run. But then this happened. Yep, it won't turn on at all. Unfortunately, I have found out that actually it is not my CPU that is dead. Instead, it is my PSU. And yeah, I know I should have tested it with the green and black cable trick, which I did eventually, but it was a bit too late. I simply assumed it was still alright since the LEDs on the motherboard were still lit. Well, I learned from my mistake now. But hey, that means my other CPU is most likely still okay and functioning. Well, I have ordered a new PSU, which should arrive tomorrow, but thanks to the magic of editing, we will find out now if it's working or not. So the new PSU is here and I have connected it to my old motherboard. I have also connected a fan to make it more visible that it is actually turning on this time, and yes, as you can see, it's working. Yes, I have not tested it fully though, if it's busting or not, but I am happy with the results for now, and I will do some further tests with it later. This just means that I have a most likely working spare CPU and motherboard for now. Who knows, I might build a home server machine with it, but let's just say goodbye for a while now. Now that I know what was wrong, I am quickly replacing the PSU with the new one and rerouting the cables. This PSU from Corsair is a semi-modular, so I will need to connect some additional cables as well. And then making sure every components are back to their place, I can finally give it another go and see if it resolves the problem. And it did. As you can see, it turns on and it's actually posting as well. So that is a big weight off of my shoulder and I can start using my PC again. So yeah, I have learned my mistake from this. I need to test every component before I come to a conclusion. But hey, a little bit of extra horsepower will come handy now. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this video as well. Feel free to ask any questions regarding to this build in the comment section down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you are a fan. Thank you very so much for joining me and I will see you in the next one.